For centuries, humanity had been known as the voice of reason among the stars. When war threatened to consume entire civilizations, it was always the United Terran Federation that stepped forward, offering diplomacy instead of destruction. They had mediated conflicts between ancient rivalries, prevented genocidal campaigns, and even convinced warlike species to lay down their arms in the name of peace. Many alien empires saw this as wisdom, but the Exelthar dominion saw it as nothing more than weakness. The Exelthar were a ruthless, war-hardened species that had expanded their dominion through brute force, enslaving or annihilating any civilization that dared to resist. And now, they had set their sights on humanity's outer colonies, convinced that these peace-loving creatures would fall without a fight. The first attack came without warning. Exelthar fleets emerged from the void and descended upon human colonies, wiping out entire settlements with relentless precision. Civilians were slaughtered, cities were turned to rubble, and distress signals were silenced before they could even reach Earth. Yet, despite the unprovoked assault, humanity still tried to negotiate. The Terran Federation sent emissaries to the Galactic Council, urging them to intervene. They called for an immediate ceasefire, offering terms that would ensure peace while allowing the Exelthar to retreat without consequences. The Council, made up of various alien species, hesitated. Many of them had long feared the Exelthar and did not want to provoke their wrath. They advised patience, urging humanity to keep negotiating, to keep talking, to avoid war at all costs. But the Exelthar saw this as an opportunity to strike even harder. They ignored every diplomatic message, destroying entire fleets of unarmed transport ships and broadcasting their own response across the galactic network. "Surrender," the Exelthar warlord declared, his deep guttural voice filled with contempt, "or be erased from the stars." The message echoed across every known system, and many alien nations shuddered. They had seen this before. The Exelthar had made the same demands to countless other civilizations, and those who refused had been utterly wiped out. The warlord had no reason to believe humanity would be any different. After all, humans had always chosen diplomacy over war. And then, for the first time in history, humanity went silent. There was no counteroffer, no desperate plea for peace, no final attempt at diplomacy. The Terran Federation recalled all ambassadors, cut off communications, and withdrew their representatives from the Galactic Council. The council chambers, once filled with humanity's calm and reasoned voices, were now eerily quiet. No one knew what the humans were planning. Some believed they had finally accepted defeat and would surrender. Others feared something far worse. But the Exelthar did not care. To them, the silence was nothing more than proof that humanity was broken, too afraid to even respond. Emboldened, the Exelthar war machine pressed forward, sending more fleets to claim the remaining human colonies. But something was different. Their forward scouts reported strange disturbances, empty outposts where there should have been resistance, derelict human stations abandoned with systems still running, supply routes disrupted without a trace of an enemy fleet. And then came the first real warning. Exelthar invasion force arrived at one of humanity's core colonies, expecting an easy conquest, but they found the planet completely evacuated. Not a single human remained. Confused, the Exelthar forces landed, believing they had already won. But as their soldiers marched through the abandoned cities, their warships hovering above in victory, the trap was sprung. Without warning, the sky erupted with fire. Human warships, unseen and undetected, decloaked in perfect formation, their weapons already primed. The Exelthar had assumed humanity's silence was a sign of weakness, but in reality, it had been a warning. The bombardment was swift and merciless. Exelthar command ships exploded before they could react. Ground forces were cut off from retreat, and planetary defenses thought to be inactive came online, unleashing devastating counterattacks. Within minutes, the invasion force was obliterated. The few Exelthar who survived tried to send distress signals, but none of them ever reached their empire. Their transmissions were jammed, their escape routes blocked, and their fleets reduced to drifting wreckage. It was not a battle. It was an execution. And yet, humanity still did not speak. No victory message was broadcast. No demands were sent. No retaliation was declared. The Terran Federation simply continued its eerie, calculated silence, while one by one, Exulthar fleets began to vanish without a trace. Supply convoys disappeared. Entire battalions went missing. Weapons caches were destroyed without any sign of an enemy force. The Exulthar Dominion, once confident in their conquest, began to panic. Their warlords demanded answers, but there were none. The enemy they had mocked as weak was now something else entirely, something they did not understand, something they could not see. For the first time in their history, the Exulthar felt fear. And somewhere in the cold void of space, hidden beyond their reach, humanity was watching, waiting. They had tried peace. They had offered diplomacy. But the moment humanity stopped negotiating, the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy had never known silence like this. For years, humanity had been a constant voice in the Galactic Council, always speaking, always negotiating, always advocating for peace. Their absence was unnatural, unsettling. The council chambers, once filled with humanity's logical debates and careful diplomacy, now felt empty. Other species whispered among themselves, wondering what the Terran Federation was planning. Some believed that humanity had simply accepted its fate, withdrawing into itself to prepare for inevitable defeat. Others feared something far worse. But no one truly understood the gravity of the situation, not yet. The Exulthar Dominion, however, did not care for speculation. As far as they were concerned, they had already won. The humans had stopped talking, and to the war-hungry Exulthar, that silence meant surrender. Their fleets surged forward, pushing deeper into human territory. More colonies were invaded, but something was different. Where the Exulthar had expected desperate resistance, they found nothing. Entire planets had been abandoned before their arrival. Massive cities, once teeming with life, stood eerily silent, their streets empty, their systems still running. It was as if humanity had vanished into thin air. The Exulthar commanders were confused but unconcerned. If the humans wanted to flee, let them. It only made their conquest easier. But as the days passed, something strange started happening. Supply convoys failed to arrive. Communication between fleets grew sporadic, filled with fragmented messages and panicked distress signals that cut off mid-transmission. Exulthar warlords sent scouts to investigate. At first, they dismissed these incidents as minor disruptions, perhaps technical failures or small resistance groups causing trouble. But then, entire battle groups started disappearing. It began with the 72 N Exulthar fleet, a powerful armada sent to secure a major Terran stronghold. Their last transmission was brief and confusing, garbled voices, alarms blaring, a frantic scream before silence. No wreckage was found. No escape pods. No trace of battle. It was as if the fleet had never existed. The Dominion High Command grew concerned. They dispatched a second fleet to investigate, this time with heavier escort ships, planetary bombardment weapons, and advanced sensor arrays. But the same thing happened. They reached the designated system, sent a routine check-in, and then nothing. Another fleet, gone without a trace. Panic started to creep into the Dominion ranks. The Exulthar had never faced an enemy like this. Their entire war doctrine revolved around overwhelming force, crushing resistance through sheer brutality. They were used to enemies that either surrendered or fought back with whatever strength they had left. But this was something else. Humanity was not resisting. They were not surrendering. They were simply watching, waiting, striking when least expected. And they did so with such precision that even the most seasoned Exulthar generals had no idea how to respond. They attempted to tighten their formations, increase security, deploy more scouts. None of it mattered. The disappearances continued. Rumors spread through the Dominion ranks. Some whispered that the humans had developed new stealth technology, allowing them to move unseen. Others believed they had unleashed something far more terrifying, an artificial intelligence beyond anything the galaxy had ever known, capable of dismantling entire fleets before anyone realized they were under attack. A few even feared that the humans had become something else entirely, something no longer bound by the laws of conventional warfare. Whatever the truth was, One fact remained: the Excelsior were losing, and they didn't even know how. And then, the first survivors appeared. Excelsior battleship, heavily damaged, drifted into one of their core systems. Its crew had been reduced to a handful of terrified soldiers, their eyes hollow, their bodies trembling. When questioned, they could barely speak. All they could describe were shadows moving in the void, silent ships that struck without warning, weapons that left no time for retaliation. One survivor, a high-ranking officer, managed to say only one thing before collapsing in fear. The Dominion High Command could no longer deny the truth. This was not a war. This was an extermination. And it was being carried out with a level of precision and ruthlessness that no one had expected from the so-called peaceful humans. For the first time in their history, the Excelsior were not the hunters, they were the hunted. Their leaders convened an emergency war council, demanding answers, searching for weaknesses in humanity's tactics. But there were no answers. There were no weaknesses. The enemy they had dismissed as weak had become something terrifyingly efficient. Desperation set in. The Excelsior attempted to send a message to the Galactic Council seeking aid. They had mocked the Council for years, ridiculing its reliance on diplomacy, but now they were willing to beg. Yet, as the transmission was being prepared, something happened that sent shockwaves through the entire Dominion. Their homeworld, once thought to be the most secure planet in the galaxy, was suddenly plunged into chaos. Explosions rocked military installations, power grids failed without explanation, orbital defense platforms turned against their own ships. And then, for the first time since the war began, a human transmission came through. It was not a plea. It was not a negotiation. It was a simple, chilling message. We tried to talk. You refused to listen. Now, we will finish this. The message repeated once. Then, silence. And the Excelsior finally understood. Humanity had not been retreating. They had not been running. They had been setting the stage for something far worse than war. A reckoning. And now, it was too late to stop it. The silence before the storm had ended, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Excelsior Dominion had always ruled through fear. Their warlords believed in the power of overwhelming force, in crushing their enemies so completely that no one would dare rise against them. They had done it to countless species before, leaving only ruins and subjugated survivors in their wake. But now, for the first time in their history, they were the ones afraid. Humanity had never declared war, never made any official statement of retaliation. And yet, the Dominion was falling apart. Their fleets vanished without a trace, their supply lines crumbled, and their once mighty empire now felt like a decaying beast, bleeding out in the dark. The worst part was that no one could see the enemy. No grand human armada arrived to challenge them in open battle. No desperate insurgents launched suicide attacks. There was only silence, and then destruction. The Dominion's high command scrambled for answers. They deployed scout ships, increased patrols, and fortified the remaining strongholds. But none of it worked. The scouts never returned. The patrols disappeared. The fortresses were turned into smoldering wreckage before they even knew they were under attack. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They weren't sending fleets to engage in drawn-out battles. They were hunting. One by one, the Excelsior's war machines were being picked apart with eerie precision. It was as if humanity had studied every weakness, every flaw in their strategy, and was now exploiting them without mercy. On the outer rim of Dominion space, a fleet of 30 Excelsior warships had been stationed at a key military outpost, an attempt to secure what little ground they still held. The Excelsior commanders reassured themselves that they were safe. 30 warships were more than enough to repel any attack. But then, one by one, the ships started going dark. It began with a single destroyer, its lights flickering before it drifted aimlessly. No distress call, no sign of damage. Just gone. Then another ship. Then another. The remaining captains tried to contact each other, but their signals were jammed. The outpost itself, heavily fortified and surrounded by planetary defense systems, was the next to go. Explosions tore through its structure from within, as if the station had been sabotaged before the attack even began. B. By the time the last ship tried to escape, it was already too late. The Excelsior crew barely had time to register the enemy before their system shut down. In the brief moments before their destruction, some managed to catch a glimpse of something moving in the void, massive shadows, sleek and untraceable, slipping between the wreckage like predators in the dark. And then, silence. The fleet was gone, the outpost reduced to drifting debris. The Excelsior High Command never even received a final transmission. It was as if the entire system had simply been erased. The few Excelsior who survived these attacks spoke in hushed, terrified voices. They described weapons they had never seen before, ships that appeared and disappeared without warning, and an enemy that never left survivors. Some believed humanity had developed advanced stealth technology, far beyond anything the Dominion could counter. Others whispered of AI warships, machines capable of thinking faster, striking harder, and eliminating their targets before they even knew they were under attack. A few even suggested that the humans had become something else entirely, something more than flesh and blood. Whatever the truth was, one thing was clear. It was fighting ghosts. Desperation spread through the ranks. Entire sectors of the Dominion's empire fell silent, their forces either destroyed or too afraid to send transmissions. The warlords, once confident in their superiority, now argued among themselves, accusing each other of incompetence. They ordered planetary lockdowns, turning their own worlds into fortresses in a futile attempt to protect themselves. It did not matter. The attacks continued. The humans struck wherever they pleased, with no pattern, no warning. The Dominion's leadership was paralyzed, unable to predict where the next strike would come. And that was when they realized the true horror of what was happening. Humanity was not simply fighting a war. They were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. Every attack was deliberate, every strike aimed at cutting off resources, severing communication, and destabilizing leadership. This was not an act of revenge. This was extermination, executed with terrifying efficiency. And then, for the first time since the war began, a human voice spoke across the Dominion's communication channels. It was calm, devoid of rage or hatred. This is not war. This is a lesson. The message was brief. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a simple statement of fact. The Dominion had thought itself untouchable, had believed that might alone determine the fate of the galaxy. But now, they understood the truth. Strength was not just about brutality. Strength was patience, intelligence, precision. Humanity had spent centuries watching, learning, adapting. They had tried diplomacy. They had tried to reason. And when that failed, they had shown the Dominion what true power looked like. Across the galaxy, the other empires watched in stunned silence. They had always known humanity as the mediators, the peacemakers, the species that sought harmony above all else. But now, they saw a different side. They saw what happened when patience ran out. The lesson was clear. Humanity had no desire to rule the stars, no interest in conquest. But if provoked, if forced into war, they would not fight for survival. They would fight to win. The Excelsior Dominion, once feared across the galaxy, was crumbling. Their fleets were gone, their leaders divided, their forces in full retreat. And yet, humanity still did not stop. The unseen war was not over. Not yet. Because there was one final message the Terran Federation needed to send, one last lesson to be learned. The Excelsior had started this war believing they were unstoppable. Now, they would learn what it meant to be truly powerless. The unseen war would end soon. But when it did, the galaxy would never forget. The Excelsior Dominion had never known fear, not like this. The war had started as a conquest, another routine expansion of their empire, a display of dominance over a weaker species. But now, they were no longer conquerors. They were prey. And the hunters were relentless. Entire fleets had vanished. Fortress worlds had gone silent. Their warlords, once arrogant and assured of their victory, now spoke in hushed, panicked voices. Even their most hardened generals had stopped making promises of triumph. Because there was no battlefield. There was no enemy to face. There was only darkness, and then destruction. And now, humanity was preparing to deliver its final message. Across the remaining Dominion-controlled systems, Excelthor forces were in chaos. Paranoia ran deep. No one trusted their own communications, fearing human infiltration. No ship dared to travel alone. No outpost dared to send a distress call, afraid that speaking into the void would invite annihilation. Their core systems had become prisons, locked down in a futile attempt to prevent the inevitable. It did not matter. The humans were already inside. They had been inside for a long time. The Dominion had spent centuries believing that power came from brute force, from breaking their enemies through sheer strength. But the humans had shown them something far worse: silence. The kind of silence that preceded absolute destruction. And then it began. The first world to burn was Exorvatak, one of the oldest and most fortified planets in the Dominion. It had never known invasion, never seen war touch its surface. The Excelthor considered it untouchable. That belief shattered in a single night. It started with the planetary defense systems. They turned against their own ships, blasting them apart before they even had time to react. Then the orbital stations lost power, leaving them helpless as unseen forces ripped through their hulls. By the time the Excelthor ground forces realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Fire rained from the skies, not from human warships, but from their own weapons, hijacked and used against them. Precision strikes wiped out military headquarters, supply lines, and command centers. Cities were not destroyed, but every government building, every fortress, every symbol of Excelthor rule was reduced to rubble. The humans had not come to exterminate civilians. They had come to send a message. And that message was written in fire. Word spread faster than the destruction itself. Every surviving Dominion world heard the same reports. Human forces striking without warning, erasing military power with terrifying efficiency. But it wasn't just the attacks that broke the Dominion, it was the way they happened. No chaotic battles. No prolonged sieges. Just calculated, deliberate precision. The Excelthor, for the first time in their existence, had no idea how to fight back. Their ships were useless, their fortresses nothing but targets. Every attempt to counterattack ended in failure before it even began. And all the while, the humans said nothing. They did not demand surrender. They did not offer terms. They simply dismantled the Dominion, one system at a time. On the Dominion's homeworld, Excelzakar, the High Command watched in horror as their empire crumbled. They had sent fleets, hundreds of warships to reclaim lost territories. None had returned. They had called for reinforcements. None had responded. They had even attempted to reach out to the Galactic Council, the very institution they had once mocked. But no one answered. The Excelthor had spent centuries making enemies, and now no one in the galaxy cared to save them. And then the final message arrived. It was not sent through Dominion communication channels. No signals were detected. No transmissions were intercepted. It simply appeared on every screen, on every device, across every remaining Zelthar world. The message was short. Simple. It is over. That was all. But the meaning was clear. The war had ended not with a treaty, not with surrender, but with the absolute collapse of the Dominion. The Excelthor had spent centuries believing that force was the only way to rule. They had thought themselves invincible. And now they understood the truth. They had not been conquered. They had not been defeated. They had been erased. On the Excelthor homeworld, the sky burned as their once mighty fleets fell from orbit. The warlords, the same ones who had laughed at humanity's diplomacy, now cowered in fear as the cities around them crumbled. But humanity did not strike the final blow. They did not need to. The Excelthor knew they were finished. The moment they saw the last of their warships reduced to smoldering wreckage, they knew there was no future left for them. The galaxy they had once ruled now belonged to those who understood power, not the power of brutality, but the power of patience, intelligence, and precision. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fire stopped. The humans did not occupy Exelthor worlds. They did not claim new territories. They did not demand anything. They had sent their message, and now they were gone. The silence that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. It was not the silence of diplomacy. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of something far worse, the silence of an empire that had ceased to exist. And across the galaxy, every other species understood the lesson. Humanity had never wanted war. They had always preferred peace. But when pushed beyond their limits, they did not fight like the others. They did not seek mere survival. They ensured that the enemy would never rise again.